April 19th, 1945, 6:40 a.m., somewhere near Regensburg, Germany. The air smelled of damp earth and burnt diesel. The morning roll call echoed through the compound. Boots striking gravel, names shouted in 2 languages. Inside the wire, a single red kerchief fluttered on a fence post. It didn't belong there. Someone had tied it to dry after washing it in the cold water barrel. The guards laughed. "Even prisoners want to decorate the place," one of them muttered. But 15 seconds later, the laughter stopped. The kerchief wasn't decoration. It was a signal. Not for escape, but for attention. And that small act would start a story that defied an entire war's logic. The story of Anna Weiss, a German woman prisoner, and Jack Miller, the American guard who couldn't look away. The paradox of that morning still haunts the few who witnessed it. 2 enemies, one in uniform, one in rags, exchanging a single glance that no one else understood. The camp itself held roughly 100-200 German POWs, though a few dozen were women, captured clerks, nurses and assistants from retreating units. US Army records from the 7720th Military Police Battalion list the camp simply as Holding Site C, Civilian Overflow. It wasn't supposed to exist long enough for love to happen. Jack Miller, 26, had arrived from the Ardennes front just 3 weeks earlier. He looked too kind to be a guard, recalled Corporal Sam O'Neill, his bunkmate, in a 1947 interview for Stars and Stripes. He'd hand out extra rations when nobody watched. We used to call him Preacher, though he never preached. Jack didn't know much German, only a few words learned from captured soldiers. But he noticed the woman with the kerchief, how she stood straighter than most, eyes fixed on the horizon, as though waiting for someone who wouldn't come. Anna Weiss had once been a nurse in Dresden before the February firebombings reduced the city to ash. The contrast between her former life, saving lives, and her present one, counted as a captured enemy, defined the quiet tragedy of that camp. Each morning she lined up for bread, the same 2 slices, the same metallic coffee. The camp smelled of wet wool and disinfectant, and yet, on that particular morning, something felt different. Jack lingered near her section longer than usual. He noticed the faint tremor in her hands when she received her ration tin. Later, when a gust of wind lifted the red kerchief again, he stepped forward and pinned it down with his own cap, saying quietly, "It'll fly away otherwise." She didn't reply, just nodded, lips trembling with the effort to stay silent. The exchange lasted seconds, but for both, it carved a fracture line in their duty. One of the older guards, a sergeant named Harper, mocked him later. "You think these people are your friends, Miller? Wait till one of them bites you." Jack didn't answer. He just said, "I don't see enemies anymore, just people trying to survive." That night he couldn't sleep. The image of that red cloth lingered, a small defiance of grey despair. He didn't know her name yet, but something in her eyes, that mix of pride and exhaustion, felt like a story waiting to be told. The next morning, as he passed her section again, a scrap of paper fell near his boot. No one else noticed. It was folded twice, written in shaky English. "I was nurse, not soldier. You're kind. Danke." It was the first message, the first of many, but this was only the beginning. Before she became prisoner number F47, Anna Weiss was a nurse at St. Joseph's Hospital in Dresden, a city once called the Florence on the Elbe. She had studied medicine to heal, not to serve war. But by 1943, every German hospital had been absorbed into the Reich's military system. The paradox was cruel. The more she saved, the more soldiers returned to the front. When the bombs fell in February 1945, Dresden burned at 500 Randlsen. The asphalt melted. The oxygen vanished. Anna dug through smoking ruins for survivors, her apron scorched, her hands shaking from heat and shock. "The sky looked like blood made of glass," she would later write in a 1951 letter to a Red Cross archivist. That night, she lost her mother and younger sister. She didn't cry, She simply went back to work. By March, Soviet forces pushed from the east, Americans from the west. The hospital was evacuated. Anna volunteered to guide a convoy of wounded civilians heading west toward Bavaria. When the trucks were intercepted near Regensburg by US infantry, she and a handful of surviving nurses were taken into custody. None carried weapons, but in the chaos of collapsing lines, no one cared who was soldier or nurse anymore. The Americans processed them like any other captives. Fingerprints, identification, search. Anna recalled the cold touch of the metal tag as they fastened it to her wrist. POW, Female Civilian Auxiliary. The term itself was an invention. There were no formal protocols for women prisoners. They were placed in a segregated section behind the men's barracks, watched day and night. Some of the guards were polite, some were not, wrote Private Harold Bishop in a later diary found by his grandson. Most just ignored them. But one fellow, Jack Miller, seemed different, talked less, watched more. Each morning began with the rattle of tin cups and the smell of burnt barley coffee. The women washed in cold water drawn from a cracked pump. There was no soap left by April. They cleaned their hair with ash and salt. The routines stripped away names, replaced them with numbers, until individuality became rebellion. Anna's defiance was her poise, a straight back, clean posture, and eyes that met whoever addressed her. Jack noticed that quiet resilience. It contrasted the hopelessness around him. The paradox struck him hard. She was technically the enemy, yet her humanity made him question everything he'd been told. One afternoon, he saw her kneeling beside another prisoner, a frail woman coughing blood. Anna used a broken spoon to scoop water from a barrel, whispering comfort in German. Jack later wrote in his journal, "She looked more like a nurse than any uniformed medic I'd seen in combat." That night, while on guard duty, he overheard two officers debating transfers. The women's section would be relocated eastward within days, possibly to a Soviet-controlled zone. The rumour chilled him. Everyone in camp had heard stories of what happened to German prisoners in the east. The next morning, when he passed the fence again, Anna was there, folding bandages from torn linen. Their eyes met briefly. She said nothing, but the silence between them was full, like a question neither dared to voice. Jack returned to his post, his mind crowded with impossible thoughts. "We weren't supposed to see them as people," he later told a chaplain, "but she made that order impossible." The microhook of destiny had been set. The woman who had survived fire was now caught in a new kind of danger, the risk of compassion, in a place built to erase it. But compassion, once stirred, does not stay quiet for long. The next days would test both their duties and redefine what it meant to be enemies. Jack Miller had been in uniform for 3 years when he first saw the inside of a POW camp. Before that, he was a mechanic in Dayton, Ohio, fixing tractors and radios, not guarding prisoners. He enlisted in 1942, believing like millions that his duty was simple: defeat the enemy and go home. But by 1945, the war had already changed its shape, and his beliefs along with it. The paradox of Jack's life began with a promise. His father, a World War I veteran, had told him before deployment, "Remember, son, mercy doesn't make you weak, it makes you human." Yet mercy was the very thing the army trained out of him. Orders were clear. No personal contact with detainees, no fraternization, no gifts, no exceptions. The punishment for breaking that rule was court-martial, 10 years in prison, or worse if the offence occurred in a war zone, but war's rules and war's aftermath rarely matched. Jack's unit, the 720th Military Police Battalion, managed 4 POW camps across southern Germany. Their main tasks: prevent escapes, distribute rations, and report any emotional breaches between guards and prisoners. In practice, that meant standing watch 12 hours a day and pretending not to notice the suffering inside the fences. Private Sam O'Neill later said, "We joke about the regs, But we all knew Miller wasn't built for that kind of detachment. US Army Oral History Archive, 1948. He followed protocol but refused cruelty. If a prisoner fell during roll call, he helped them up. If someone needed medical attention, he found a medic instead of turning away. "You keep that up, you'll end up in the wrong report," O'Neill warned him once. Jack just shrugged. "Then I'll write the report myself." That spirit drew ridicule and respect in equal measure. Some guards called him St. Jack. Others muttered traitor under their breath. He ignored both. But after meeting Anna, neutrality became impossible. He began noticing details he wasn't supposed to. How the women were always given cold meals last. How the blankets never reached their section. How they worked longer shifts cleaning the latrines. One day, when he saw Anna staggering under a water pail too heavy for her frame, he quietly took a step forward, grabbed the second handle and helped her lift it. "You'll get written up for that," the sergeant barked from behind. Jack replied, "Then write faster." That act of defiance spread through the camp like rumour fire. Some laughed, others shook their heads. "You can't save them all," said Harper, the senior guard. Jack's answer was quiet. "Maybe I just start with one." Later that week, Anna approached the fence during his shift. She held up a scrap of bread and half whispered, "For you. Thank you." Jack refused to take it, shaking his head. But her eyes softened and she smiled. A fragile, fleeting smile in a place built for despair. Couldn't forget that moment. Nor the quiet voice inside him that said, "You crossed something invisible." At night the camp buzzed with static radios and distant thunder. The smell of diesel hung thick in the barracks. Jack lay awake, staring at the wooden ceiling, replaying her voice. He wasn't in love yet. Not then. It was something smaller, quieter. The simple recognition that compassion could exist between enemies. Still, his conscience wrestled with his orders. "You start caring. You start breaking," O'Neill told him. "And once you break, they'll ship you out." Jack's reply was almost a whisper. "Then they'll have to find someone else to stand in my place." But fate had already decided otherwise. The next inspection would bring him closer to Anna than ever before, and force him to choose between what he swore to obey and what he was born to feel. The camp's silence was deceptive. Beneath the daily routine, the clang of mess tins, the whistle of morning drills, the scratch of pencils in the guard log, a quiet rebellion was unfolding, letter by letter. It began with a folded scrap of ration paper. Anna slipped it between the wires one morning, pretending to hang laundry. "You're not like the others," she wrote, her English halting but clear. Jack found it an hour later while walking his patrol line. He didn't answer that day. He just stared at the note, the faint scent of soap and smoke still on it, before tucking it into his breast pocket. The paradox struck him. The enemy's handwriting looked more human than his own reports. A week later he replied, a single word penciled on a torn corner of his notebook. Safe. He dropped it near her section under the guise of fixing the wire. That single word started a dialogue carried by silence and risk. They exchanged small truths about rain, about hunger, about missing home. Anna told him her favourite season was autumn because it makes endings beautiful. Jack wrote that his mother used to bake apple pie every Sunday, and he could still smell it in his dreams. It wasn't a romance yet. It was survival through words. But in a place where names were erased, writing became resistance. Witnesses noticed the subtle changes. "She smiled more," recalled another prisoner, Helga Kruger, in a 1972 interview for Die Zeit. "The guards thought she was losing her mind. I think she was finding hope." Jack became more cautious. He learned the schedule of inspections, memorized blind spots where the fence wasn't patrolled. Once he slipped her a stub of a pencil wrapped in a candy wrapper. "Write when it's quiet," he said softly, avoiding her eyes. The procedural detail mattered. Each letter had to fit on half a palm-sized scrap, folded twice, hidden in the hem of a blanket or under a tin plate. Any discovery meant solitary confinement for her and demotion for him. But they kept writing. The sound of pencils became their heartbeat. One night, rain drummed on the barracks roof. Jack opened his locker and found another note. This one carried by a messenger boy assigned to laundry duty. It read, "You guard the fence, I guard my heart, but both are not safe anymore." That was when he knew. Whatever this was, it had gone beyond kindness. A week later, Anna asked him a question that froze him. "When war ends, will people like me still be your enemy?" He hesitated. "If it ends, I'll tell you then." She smiled. "Then I will wait." Outside the wire, rumours swirled of Germany's surrender. The men in the barracks debated how long the war would last. Some said days, some said weeks. But for Jack and Anna, time had already changed. Each second together felt stolen from history. Their world had shrunk to a fence, and yet within that narrow boundary, something enormous had begun to grow. But peace would not bring safety. It would bring decisions and dangers far greater than either imagined. The next transfer order was already on its way from headquarters, sealed in a brown envelope marked "Reassignment Civilian Female Detainees." What came next would force Jack to confront the very system he served, and risk everything for a woman history said he shouldn't love. May 7th, 1945, 10:30 a.m. A radio crackled inside the camp command post. The voice of General Eisenhower's staff echoed through static. "The German High Command has signed an unconditional surrender." Outside, a strange silence followed, the kind that comes when noise itself runs out of meaning. The war was officially over, but for the people inside the wire it wasn't freedom. It was uncertainty. The paradox was cruel. Peace for the world meant fear for the prisoners. Anna stood among the others as words spread like wind through the compound. Some cheered, some wept. She didn't move. She knew what surrender meant. Transfer. Under new agreements, German civilians in Allied custody were to be repatriated, a clean word for a brutal fate. Many would be sent to the Soviet zone, accused of collaboration, and never seen again. Jack learned the details that afternoon. The transfer order listed 28 female prisoners marked for transport east within 72 hours. Anna's number, F-47, was among them. He read the paper twice, his pulse rising. The thought of her boarding a Soviet-bound truck, of her vanishing into a system known for revenge, made his throat tighten. Corporal O'Neill noticed. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said. Jack folded the paper, slid it into his jacket. Maybe I just lost something I never really had. That night the camp celebrated. The guards opened ration tins, passed around cigarettes, even played a scratched record of Glenn Miller's Moonlight Serenade. But Jack couldn't join in. The air smelled of rain and kerosene. Somewhere near the women's fence he saw a flicker of movement. Anna watching the lights from afar. He walked closer, staying in the shadows. "You heard the news?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "War ends, but for us, it starts again." Jack hesitated, his voice barely a whisper. "They're moving your group east. Soon." Her face went pale. "To Russians?" He nodded. She looked down, the lamplight catching the tremor in her hands. "Then I will not come back." There are moments in history that split a man's life clean in two, before and after. For Jack, it was that sentence. Procedurally, he had options: file an appeal, report an error, request delay. But bureaucracy in wartime moved slower than mercy. He had only days, maybe hours. "Could you help me?" she asked, her voice fragile but steady. He didn't answer at first. The rain started again, soft as static. He said finally, "If I do, they'll call it treason." "Then maybe love is treason," she replied. That line would echo in his mind for the rest of his life. For the next 24 hours, Jack moved like a man caught between two worlds. He studied shift rosters, fuel records, and delivery schedules. He learned that a supply truck was scheduled to leave for a depot near Reims, France. Before dawn 2 days later, it would pass through the camp's southern gate, the least guarded one. O'Neill caught him sketching something on a scrap of paper. "You planning a field trip?" he joked. Jack smiled weakly. "Something like that." He didn't explain. He couldn't. Instead, he began collecting small things. A spare uniform jacket, an old blanket, a half-empty canteen. He even borrowed a civilian pass from a mechanic heading west. The next evening he slipped another note through the fence. "Be ready when the truck stops for water. Midnight. Trust me." Anna burned the note immediately after reading it. Her hand shook, but her decision didn't. As night fell over the camp, thunder rolled in the distance. The smell of ozone filled the air, the scent of change, of something about to break. The countdown had begun. May 9th, 1945, 12:03 a.m. Rain turned the camp road into a ribbon of mud. The headlights of the supply truck cut through mist like two pale eyes. Jack Miller stood beside it, clipboard in hand, pretending to check manifests. His heart pounded so loud he feared others might hear it. "Water stop, 2 minutes," the driver called, stepping down to light a cigarette. Jack nodded, signalling toward the pump near the women's section, exactly where Anna waited. The paradox of that moment. A soldier of victory helping the enemy escape in the very hour his army celebrated peace. Anna emerged from the shadows wrapped in a grey blanket. The rain flattened her hair, darkening her face to near invisibility. Jack motioned for silence. He opened the rear tarp of the truck, revealing crates of medical supplies. "Get in," he whispered. She hesitated for only half a second before climbing inside. He covered her with a tarp, securing the ropes with trembling hands. Then, as if nothing unusual had happened, he signaled the driver to move. The engine growled, drowning out his pulse. "See you in Reims," the driver called. Jack gave a tight nod. "Copy that." He watched the truck disappear into the darkness, carrying the woman who had rewritten his world. But the quiet didn't last. At 2:15 a.m., during routine head count, a corporal shouted, "Missing! 1 female, number F47. The alarm rang across the compound. Searchlights swept the mud. Voices barked orders. Within an hour, every outbound route was under investigation. O'Neill found Jack in the guard shack. "They're saying one of the women escaped. You hear?" Jack looked down at his paperwork, forcing calm. "Yeah, I heard." "You think she'll make it?" Jack swallowed hard. "I think she deserves to." By dawn, the camp commander had called in military police. Jack's logbook was checked, his shift record reviewed. When they found the missing vehicle report, one truck unaccounted for, suspicion turned his way. At 10:40 a.m., an MP approached him. "Sergeant Miller, you're coming with us." They took him to the post-interrogation room, a bare space smelling of oil and coffee. "You were on duty last night," the officer said flatly. "A prisoner escaped during your shift. Care to explain?" Jack stared at the desk. Maybe the rain covered her tracks. The officer leaned closer. Or maybe someone helped her. Outside, the world celebrated victory. Inside, one man faced ruin for an act of mercy. Meanwhile, the truck carrying Anna rolled west through wrecked villages. She hid under crates, barely breathing, every bump in the road feeling like judgment. Through a tear in the tarp, she saw dawn break over the French border, the first sunrise she had watched without a fence in months. Her later testimony to the Red Cross in 1946 described it simply. "I felt both free and hunted. My freedom was his. Prison." Back in Regensburg, interrogation intensified. When the officer mentioned Anna by number, Jack's silence gave him away. He was arrested for aiding escape of enemy prisoner, a charge punishable by 10 years of confinement. But something unexpected happened. When word spread among other guards, even those who had mocked him grew quiet. One said, "If that's a crime, maybe we all pick the wrong side of mercy." 3 days later, Anna was found near Metz, hiding in an abandoned barn. She didn't resist. "Where is he?" she asked only once. They brought her back in silence. When she stepped off the transport truck, Jack was already in handcuffs. Their eyes met across the yard. One glance that contained every word they hadn't been allowed to say. A witness, Corporal O'Neill, later recalled, Nobody spoke. Rain started again, just like the night she left, but this time no one laughed. The camp had found its scandal, but history had found its story. What followed wasn't punishment, it was revelation, a trial that would make headlines, test the definition of duty, and change how two nations saw compassion after war. May 22, 1945, Nuremberg Military Court, Temporary Allied Tribunal Room. The air smelled of chalk and damp uniforms. Outside, spring sunlight fell over broken rooftops. Germany's cities were ruins, but the war's paperwork still marched on. Jack Miller stood in front of 3 officers and 1 civilian advisor. His wrists bore the red marks of restraints recently removed. Across the room, under light guard, sat Anna Weiss, no longer prisoner number F-47, but a witness in his defense. The paradox couldn't have been sharper. A captured enemy testifying to save the soldier who once guarded her. The charge sheet was brief. Article 104, Section 3 of the US Army Code. Aiding the escape of an enemy prisoner of war. Maximum penalty. 10 years imprisonment with hard labour. Jack didn't deny it. Yes, he said simply, when asked if he'd helped her flee. The courtroom murmured. Why? The presiding officer demanded. Jack's answer came steady, quiet. Because I forgot she was supposed to be my enemy. Reporters scribbled the line down instantly. Within days it appeared in Stars and Stripes, the New York Times, and even the Daily Mail. One headline read, American Guard risks prison for German nurse. The tribunal expected outrage. Instead, the story captured weary hearts. After 6 years of hatred and loss, the world was starved for humanity. Letters arrived from soldiers' families across the US. Don't punish him. He fought his war already. Witnesses called to testify painted a different picture than the prosecutors wanted. Corporal O'Neill told the court, he never treated them like enemies. He treated them like people. Maybe that's what peace looks like. Another guard added, if compassion's a crime, half this camp should be on trial. Anna's testimony lasted just 5 minutes but silenced the room. He saved me twice, she said softly. Once from being sent east. Once from forgetting that goodness still exists. Procedurally, her statement had no legal weight. Enemy witnesses were discouraged from influencing verdicts, yet it changed the atmosphere entirely. Even the senior officer lowered his eyes. Outside, photographers waited. The smell of flash powder mixed with rain. Every image of the two, him in uniform, her in plain grey clothes, told a story larger than rules. A week later the verdict arrived. Guilty, with mitigating circumstances. Sentence commuted to discharge and 1 year's restriction of liberty. In other words, leniency. Mercy disguised as punishment. The war machine, for once, had chosen grace. When the verdict was read aloud, Anna covered her face, shoulders trembling. Jack didn't look at her until the guard stepped aside. Then, in a moment that would later appear in Life magazine, she reached out and touched his hand just once, before being led away. The caption beneath the photo read, Enemies no more. Public reaction surprised even the military. In cafes from Paris to New York, people debated whether love could exist between former enemies. Some called it betrayal. Others called it the first act of real peace. In a letter to his commanding officer, one tribunal judge later wrote, We've punished men for hate these 6 years. Perhaps it's time we stop punishing them for love. Jack's discharge came quietly that autumn. He was sent home to Ohio, carrying only his service cap and a stack of unsent letters, all addressed to Anna Weiss. But this was not the end. In fact, history was about to catch up with them again. Not in a courtroom this time, but in a registry office where nations would collide with forgiveness. Because 3 years later, in 1947, a woman named Anna Weiss Miller would step off a ship in New York Harbor, her immigration approved under spousal reunification. The impossible had become official. New York Harbor, September 14th, 1947. The Statue of Liberty glimmered through morning mist as the SS Marine Tiger docked. On the pier, a crowd of families waved flags and photographs shouting names into the wind. Somewhere among them stood Jack Miller, hair shorter, uniform traded for a plain brown coat, hands trembling around a small bouquet of white lilies. For 2 years, he hadn't seen her. For 2 years, he'd lived between headlines and memories, his name once infamous, now nearly forgotten. But to him, that obscurity was peace. He had written every week, though most letters came back stamped undeliverable, zone under Allied restriction. Then, one spring morning, an envelope from Geneva arrived. Miss Weiss has been cleared for relocation under American sponsorship. He hadn't slept since. The gangway lowered. Immigrants began to descend, faces cautious, weary. Then he saw her. Anna's hair was shorter, her dress simple, but her eyes, those calm, rain-washed eyes, were unmistakable. For a moment, neither moved. The noise of the dock faded. Time stood still between the ghosts of their separate wars. Then she dropped her suitcase and ran. Reporters later captured it. An American veteran and a former German POW meeting halfway across the gangway. Not as soldier and prisoner, but as two survivors of history's greatest madness. "Do you still believe it was wrong?" she whispered when they finally met. Jack smiled faintly. "If it was, I'd break the rules again." That afternoon, they married at the registry office on Canal Street. No uniforms, no ceremony, just 2 signatures and a promise. The clerk, moved by their story, added quietly, "Guess peace starts small." Their early life wasn't easy. America in 1947 was still haunted by its war. Some neighbours whispered. Employers hesitated. "You married a German?" one man sneered. Jack only replied, "I married the woman who reminded me I was human." They moved often, from Ohio to upstate New York, then to a small farm near Vermont. Anna worked as nurse again. Jack repaired engines, preferring the quiet rhythm of machines to the noise of politics. But the past followed them in unexpected ways. In 1950, Life magazine revisited their case in an article titled "Love Across the Barbed Wire." The photo of their dockside reunion, Jack in his coat, Anna clutching the lilies, became one of the decade's most reprinted post-war images. To some, it symbolized forgiveness. To others, controversy. When asked in a later interview what she thought of the attention, Anna answered gently, "War taught us how to divide the world. Love taught us how to rebuild it." They never returned to Germany, but every May 8th, the anniversary of her capture, she lit a candle in the window. Not for sorrow, she'd say, for remembering. Jack died in 1983, in his sleep, at age 63. At his funeral, the folded flag rested beside a yellowed clipping of their trial verdict. The words, "Leniency granted." Anna lived another 10 years. When she passed, their ashes were scattered together along the Hudson River, the same waters that had carried her to freedom. In 1995, 50 years after the end of World War II, a historian rediscovered their story in declassified tribunal records. It was published under the title, "The Guard and the Prisoner, When Compassion Defied Orders." In one preserved letter found in Jack's belongings, written but never mailed, he'd written, "Maybe love isn't what ends wars, maybe it's what survives them. And that perhaps is the real story. Not of crime or punishment, but of the fragile, defiant humanity that can bloom even in the ashes of war."